Welcome to Now Let's Talk, the podcast with Vanessa Corwin and Kathleen Kahn, where we speak with our guests about the joys and challenges of life in today's world. Hello, I'm Vanessa Corwin.
And I'm Kathleen Kahn.
Today's guest is Rob Rose, travel journalist and host of the syndicated TV show Raw Travel, where he takes viewers on his off-the-beaten-path journeys. Rob shot 4 episodes in Ukraine, where he met soldiers going to the front lines, volunteers who traveled to Ukraine to help, and Ukrainians just trying to live their lives in the face of the Russian invasion. Welcome, Rob. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me.
For those listeners who don't know your show, talk a bit about Raw Travel and tell us what makes it unique.
Yeah, so I began Raw Travel after I was living abroad in South America. I was living in Colombia in 2009 and 10, and basically just experienced travel very differently than the travel that I was seeing represented on U.S. television. And having worked in TV most of my career, I saw an opportunity. And so the type of travel I really wanted to showcase to Americans in particular, which was more long-term travel, off the beaten path, budget travel. A lot of the U.S. travel revolved around luxury or food or celebrities. And so I just immediately thought, let's do something really raw, kind of like the way I'm living. So, it was like no hair, no makeup, and, really no host was the idea. And I just kind of was the host by default because I'm free and I was financing it myself. So I'm cheap and ended up, thinking maybe it'll get on the air, maybe it won't, but it got on the air. And, I guess it worked, because it was independent. So we were able to find our way and we worked our way from 70 markets. Now we're in 187 cities and we're in our 12th season. And, I don't know how many countries I've been to, but it's several dozen or scores. And I'm very proud of the work we've done, but people think I've been everywhere. I still got a lot of places to go.
Well, it's interesting listening or watching the 4-part series on Ukraine. You did say, I didn't know much about Ukraine's history. And what did you learn and why did you go back more than one time to volunteer during this terrible invasion by Russia?
Well, I mean, the first time I went to Ukraine predated Raw Travel. It was in 2012. So that was the Yanukovych years. And for those people who don't know Yanukovych, he was like a Putin puppet. And so in 2014 was the Maidan Revolution where they ousted him and he fled to Russia. And so, I was just like watching from afar and being like, hey, I've been there, but I didn't know a lot of people, right? So I went back in 2019 after the Maidan, and that's when I really got to know people. I met musicians. I met a wonderful photographer. She took me on a photography tour, and I put her on camera, and she ended up being our videographer, Anastasia. And Anastasia was a refugee from Eastern Ukraine from the original invasion in Crimea and Eastern Ukraine in 2014. And so when I got to know Anastasia and her family's story, and they had to basically start all over in Kyiv, I was just like, wow, it hit home. And so it just happened coincidentally that I was able to go back that same year in the winter on a press tour, courtesy of Ukraine International Airlines. And so I got to go to Lviv for the first time, and I learned even more history. And so things started to fall into place at that time. And I'd also gone to the small country of Georgia that same year. And Georgia has a very similar history to Ukraine in that Russia has invaded, occupies part of the territory, meddles in their elections. They just had an election, and it's controversial because pretty sure it was messed with big time by Russia. And so after seeing all of this, when the full invasion occurred, I now knew people and my heart was breaking. And so I went back in 2022. We just barely, with Anastasia, who was refugeed in Paris. She had not been back to Ukraine since she had fled with her little brother, while her father and mother stayed behind. Her mother's a doctor. Her father's a soldier. He had to fight. Her mother stayed behind to be with her patients. And so we went back. She was able to reunite with her mother. We filmed a little bit, but it was short. So in 2023, when the documentary was filmed, I just said, I got to stay longer. I got to go deeper. And I met more people, including some humanitarians from the US, specifically Mark Carey, who's a Marine, not an active Marine, but a retired. He invited me along. And so I went back and reunited with Anastasia, and we filmed what was the 4-part docuseries, My Summer in Ukraine. And then I went back again last summer, and I stayed even longer, but I didn't film this time. I was just there to experience Ukraine, and I have, I took notes, I took photos. Hopefully, I'll write something about it someday. But one documentary is very difficult to make, so I'm still, digesting that work.
Rob, you introduce us to other volunteers who came to help, like yourself. So how are they able to get food, clothing, supplies, etc., to these families, to these people who have lost everything? Do they work with organizations? Do they work with NGOs?
Well, in 2022, when we went, the full invasion was pretty new. So places like Przemysl, Poland, which was an outpost where basically the refugees came. There was World Central Kitchen was set up there. There were tons of refugees coming through that train station. That's where you saw the footage of people just, horror in February of 2022. I didn't meet Mark Carey until 2023, but he and his humanitarian partner, who's a lady from the UK, her name is Jaime, both went when everybody was leaving, they went in. And I met so many volunteers like that. I met Paul Hughes from Canada with Hugs Ukraine. Same thing, a former military guy. Everybody's getting out. He went in. Jaime is I don't want to guess her age, but she's not young. She's not in her 20s or 30s. And she worked in the art world in London and crowdsourced a van and drove in by herself
Oh
into
my God.
Ukraine, into a war zone. And she's not ex-military. So her and Mark, and they're featured in the documentary, they just met up and said, hey, let's team up and do this. Now, to answer your question, Vanessa, this war, the volunteer effort, you hear about all the money that the United States is giving. A lot of it is just old military equipment given a dollar value. And then we're replacing our old equipment with new equipment, usually here in the United States. So it creates American jobs. So all those myths, a lot of that's Russian propaganda, unfortunately, reiterated and repeated and amplified by people in the certain political party here. But the myth that we're giving them money is just not true. We're giving them some. Most of it is military equipment. So most of the volunteer efforts are very grassroots, non-governmental organizations raising money, everything from an individual like Jaime crowdsourcing a van, to Mark getting his own little source of people. Everybody and every Ukrainian I know that is in the United States who's either been here for years, grew up maybe in the East Village or in Chicago or whatever. They all know somebody there, and they're crowdsourcing and they're finding friends and family, send socks. And then you find someone that's going, and there are these chat groups, and you're able to send, stuff over. And another group we work with, Care for Ukraine, is another American who's been living in Ukraine for 10 years. He is a logistics guy who was just living in Ukraine, and he just started Care for Ukraine and keep the kids learning because he saw something that needed to get done. So we've raised money for him as well. So it's just really a lot of grassroots efforts from a lot of different people.
Did you need permission from anybody to get into? We saw that the bombs are going and everything is right, not that far from you guys. Did you have to get an okay from either the Ukrainian government?
In 2022, it was really wild and woolly, but I did get a press pass. But anybody could go. You could go as a volunteer. Of course, you're going to get checked at the border. Traveling to and from a country at war is the hardest part of any journey, and it takes hours, sometimes days, to get in and out. So far, I've gone by train and by bus and by foot. There are several ways to cross the border. And of course, they're always going to look at your passport. But generally speaking, if you're from the United States, you're good to go. If you're from, Moldova and you're crossing over,
Mm.
Right,
they might want to check you out a little bit closer because there's a problem, of course, with Russian agents in the country and people
right,
to give away
right.
military positions, and that's always a problem. I mean, there's Russian agents here in the United States. I have stories to tell, but
Mhm.
basically, anyone can go. And at this point in time, the train is a wonderful way to get around in Ukraine. You
Mhm.
cannot fly there because the airspace is closed. And generally speaking, if you're coming from Poland, you're going through Western Ukraine, which is the more peaceful part. The front is on the east.
Mhm.
Anywhere can get hit at any time by a missile. A
Mhm.
missile costs a lot of money. So they're not as frequently bombed as someone on the east, where you can hit it with cheaper mortars. Places like
Mm.
Kherson or Kharkiv, when you get there, they're just bombing them every day, multiple
Yeah.
times a day. And of course, drones have changed all of that. And now drones hit Kyiv regularly, which is in the center of the country. So the drone warfare has made it a little cheaper for Russia. Of course, they're getting them from Iran.
Right.
But yeah, but it's anybody can go. That's what's amazing.
Now, speaking of drones, you in one of your episodes, you actually embedded yourself with a training unit of guys who were learning to use these in battle. So tell us about that. What was
Yeah,
that like?
that was amazing. I was surprised how much I enjoyed that. So that was right when drone warfare was just beginning. That was in summer of 2023. And what I liked about that, it was the day of graduation, and it was the camaraderie that these soldiers had built up because they came from different units. So they were there 10 days in this drone school, which was privately funded by
Oh,
someone who raised money,
Really?
privately funded, not by the government, but these were government troops training to go back and take the training to their own troops. And of course, flying the drones, I've drone photography, for our show. Well, I was just amazed. They were building them from the ground up because DJI is a Chinese company, will not sell to Ukrainians. They will sell to Russia, though they say they don't, but they are. And so they have to get these materials and build them themselves. But the camaraderie was amazing. I was there on graduation day. I probably got more emotional there than I did some of the other things I
oh,
saw, which was because I knew these guys were going back to the front the next day. And that some of these guys sitting around this fire pit sharing a meal with me, they're not going to come, they're going to die, or they're going to come back with missing limbs. And I don't know why, but it just, or maybe it was this the end of the trip. It was a beautiful day. And then to put an ending on it, this last summer in 2024, that drone school had been upgraded to another one, and some of the same guys took me out, and it had changed dramatically. The technology, what they were working on, they were now working on anti-drone stuff. They were working on drones that could fly farther, faster. It's just amazing how fast this innovation has progressed.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we tell to politicians in DC, especially those that seem to be reluctant to fund Ukraine, this innovation that Ukraine is putting forth is very advantageous to know because the
Mhm.
United States is behind on this.
mm,
And this is the future of warfare. And they better understand that this is the future of warfare, or we're going to be in big trouble.
right. And I know that you touched on the creativity of these soldiers in utilizing civilian equipment and kind of retrofitting them for war, like the cars and stuff. And were they modifying the drones as well?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. There are people just dedicated. I mean, the thing about Ukraine that I fell in love with it in 2019 was the artistic creativity of these folks. And I think that springs from being oppressed. Anytime I go to an oppressed, war-torn, some place that's been through hell, like Cuba, which obviously they have to be very resourceful, like Colombia, South America, had a guerrilla, a civil war for 50 years. There's a resilience there. And what you see in Ukraine is that is expressed in their art, but also in their technology, an incredibly innovative technological workforce. And so Unfortunately, a lot of people who worked in IT, had to go to the front in the early days, and they had to learn how to be soldiers. But a lot of those guys on the second wave, they used them more intelligently, and they could work retrofitting things and things like that. But yeah, there's never enough vehicles. Vehicles are they're easily disabled, like buying trucks and cars. That's really like the first thing that most people need, that the troops have to actually fundraise to buy, is a truck for their troop,
Mhm.
So, but a lot of times at the drone school, what we had is just private vehicles. So you got a nice BMW out on a dirt road,
Yeah.
where you need a four-wheeler, but they don't have Jeeps. That's where it is there. I'm sure near the front, it's more military grade vehicles, of course.
There are so many moving stories in this series, and especially you see people trying to rebuild their towns and have some semblance of normalcy. But what can you tell us, like one story that was the most memorable for you?
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to pick. I will just say that, normalization is a defense mechanism. You fight to be normal for your children. But I guess in Kherson, in 2023, the big dam had just been exploded
Mm.
by Russia. So it flooded so many people. So think about Hurricane, what was it, Helene here?
Yeah.
Think about that magnitude times 10, except man-made, unnecessary. And people's homes and beautiful farmland where they had made a living for centuries, now toxic, now unable
Mm.
to be inhabited for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, because it was disgusting to smell. And we went to this lady's house. She was an older lady, and her daughter was there, and they were just trying to salvage what they could. And she was so eager for us to film. And she didn't speak English, of course, but somebody's there from the Red Cross interpreting for us, the local chapter. And, of course, she breaks down and cries. You could tell her home was beautiful. You could
I
tell because,
remember that scene.
yeah, the top half of her home was gorgeous.
Mm.
They take care of their homes. The wealthiest man in the world, who lives in a disgustingly vulgar home, I'm talking about Putin, has a mansion that's disgusting. I'm not talking about Mar-a-Lago. Well, you ought to see Putin's house. It's a palace. And then he's destroying these hardworking people's, like, tens of thousands of their homes and everything they ever worked for. And it's so unfair and unjust. Basically, she was so upbeat anyway at the end. She'd
Yeah.
already shed so many tears, and she was like,
Yeah.
"We will win, Slava Ukraina,
Yeah.
glory to our heroes." And
Yes. Yes.
and she's gonna rebuild. And I'm like, I don't want to tell her that. I don't think she is, but I'm not gonna tell her that.
No.
I don't know. All I know is that she was very resilient, and that encapsulates Ukraine in a nutshell. But they are human beings, and
Yeah.
we don't need to take it for granted that they can just take punishment after punishment after punishment forever without intervening.
Yeah, one of the stories that certainly stood out in our minds was Lotta, the lady with the orphanage.
Yeah, Lotta is great. So I'll tell you something. In 2024, a year after filming the documentary, I'd only seen Lotta once, when Jaime, I think she was Jaime's contact. Jaime was helping support her and her orphans. And so Lotta told us a story, as you see in the docuseries, about getting those kids out of there. Because you
Mm.
remember Bucha. Bucha is where the soldiers just murdered civilians, young and old, in cold blood, and buried them, war crimes. And so that was Bucha was not far from where Lotta's orphanage is. So as word got around of what's happening in Bucha, she's like, we got to get these kids out of here. So she sends them ahead, but in order to get them out of Ukraine, she has to be there. Their caretaker does. So she's getting there, and of course she gets roughed up. And I'll let people see the documentary to see what
Yeah.
happens. Obviously, she survives. Tells me her story. Was very adamant about telling the story, and really, I knew at that point when I'm interviewing Lotta that I was in trouble, because I'm like, if someone's going to tell me this story, then I have this massive responsibility to do it justice. We told Lotta's story. A lot of people donated money just from being moved from seeing her story. And I was in Kiev, which was about an hour from where her orphanage is in 2024. And I was just going to the gym. Like I said, normal things are happening. And I look far off in this underground mall that I take to get underneath the main road. And I just see someone from the back. And I'm like, that looks like Lotta.
Oh,
And
that's
she was
funny.
so far away. And I was like, that's impossible, man. You know, what would she be doing here? And anyway, I went up and I was like, I got to see if it's her or not. So I poked her on the shoulder and it was her. And she doesn't speak English, but the coffee barista did. And the
Ah,
coffee barista translated and I bought her a coffee and we hugged. And yeah, it was wonderful seeing her there, you know, and it just, that's why I went back in 2024. I wanted to see all the people that I had filmed
Right.
in 2023 and see how they were doing mentally, physically,
Of
and
course.
show them, you know, what I could of what they participated in.
What amazed me about Lotta's story, I mean, she had a gun to her throat or head, but another soldier came over and
Yeah.
said she's a mother,
Yeah.
and that's why they let her go.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
through this nightmare, there is there's still a soul underneath it all. Uh,
absolutely. You know, it's a tough subject for Ukrainians. So I had this mantra. I have two mantras. One is I never tell hungry people what they should eat. And I don't tell war victims how they should feel.
of course,
For many Ukrainians, they hear anything to do with Russia and it's just a negative feel. And I get that. But the reality is, there are some folks who still are human, and we know that. And some of them are working, actively fighting for Ukraine against Russia.
mhm.
Some of them are inside doing some things in Russia to great risk for themselves. Others are like my buddy, who's a musician who was anti-war, but was being harassed and he had to be exiled. So he's living in South America and gave up his career and struggling mightily, all because he chose to speak out. You know, I've traveled too much. I know that human beings, there's good and bad people everywhere. But the thing about Russia is they have been brainwashed, they have been browbeaten, and they have been so cynical. It's such a cynical place right now because of, you know, what happens to people who are in the opposition. They get poisoned, they get killed. And unfortunately, we're starting to see some of that darkness happen here in the United States, and it is
Absolutely.
emanating from the same forces
Yeah.
oh yeah.
there. And this is as basic good versus evil as World War II, as far as I can tell.
Absolutely. And Ukraine has been in war for a long time.
If Kamala Harris does not win the US presidential election, what do you think will happen in Ukraine?
I think it's pretty obvious that Trump will force Ukraine to the negotiating table, and the only way to do that is Putin will freeze the conflict. He'll take whatever territory that he's already claimed, which are, if I'm correct, for about 20 to 25% of Ukraine will be declared Russia. Because I think without US support, Ukraine, even though they would fight to the last drop of blood, they probably wouldn't be able to. And even if they resisted, then Trump would say, well, look, they don't want peace, so they're on their own kind of thing. So, but the reality is, when that happens, not only have we just rewarded someone for starting a war, for invading a sovereign country, other people, such as China, will probably invade Taiwan as soon as
Mm,
the earliest opportunity.
Absolutely.
yeah.
If you notice, Venezuela started talking about Guyana, which I was like, I didn't even know
Mm,
that was disputed. There's a great book called Autocracy Inc. by Anne Applebaum. She's a writer for, I think, The Atlantic. And I read the book, and it's basically all these autocrats, they take advantage of situations. And so when they see Putin getting away with this, those guys will chime in. And at some point, probably after the Trump presidency, because there's no need to invade if you have your puppet in the White House, which is what I see Trump as. He's another
No
Yanukovych.
question about it.
oh, for sure.
I won't get into how disturbed that makes me feel with the
You
people who
can.
support him, but well, I'll just say Christians. I mean, if they saw the vile stuff that I'm exposed to from Russians, if they knew that Christians are tortured and yet they're supporting Donald Trump. I had one
Exactly.
lady email me and said, whatever Ukrainian children die because of Trump's presidency is just, collateral damage because he's going to save so many unborn children here in the United
What?
States. So basically saying an unborn child in the US is worth more than a born child in
Oh
Ukraine.
my God.
I mean, but I get exposed to all of it. And by the way, I have to look at all of it and say, is this an actual American doing this? Or is this a Russian pretending to be an American? And it
Hmm.
always goes through my mind now because Russian disinformation is so deep. We don't realize it. And so there is no doubt that we have some nasty politics going on right now between ourselves. But if you look back at the root of it, Donald Trump is not the disease. The actual disease is Russian disinformation, and Donald Trump is the symptom, the result of that.
Oh,
Now they need each
Exactly.
other. But,
It,
but yeah, that's what'll happen. And Putin will take Ukraine in whole at some point as soon as Trump is out of the White House.
Trump is in the White House. Putin's going to take
Yeah,
over.
but after he leaves, he'll wait
Then
till
what?
after he leaves,
You
probably.
mean
They'll have some
4 years?
yeah, he'll probably wait 4 years. I mean, he might or he might not. I mean, because, Trump's got to be like, I stopped the war in one day kind of thing. They're
Oh, yeah.
supporting each other. And that's what's important. And it may not be coordinated with a phone call, but they know what they're doing.
they do.
And they have
Um,
intermediaries like Elon Musk and
oh,
Tucker
yeah.
Carlson.
That's a lot of danger there. Now, Rob, when you were in Ukraine and there was shelling going on and bombs and so forth, did you fear for your own safety?
A couple times, yeah, for sure. Definitely when we were in Kherson, the bombs are going off, and I'm like a chameleon a little bit, and I think that's like with travel. So the great thing is when you get there, you're all uptight, heart's beating, your heart rate is beating. I got locked in an ATM because I was just panicking because I couldn't find the exit button and just stupid mistakes. I was afraid to get in the elevator, which, by the way, is legit fear because those elevators are
Yes.
small and old and
Yes.
Soviet and power goes out, man, you're going to be there for a while. And
Right.
I'm like, I won't do well in this enclosed place. But, you do get a little bit irrational. But here's what's great: the calmness of the Ukrainian people really calm you down. So I'm like reacting. And until they panic, I don't. But in Kherson, when the bombs are going off and I see Mark and Jaime getting uptight, we went through a couple of checkpoints where the military were very uptight by our presence because they did not
Hmm.
want to be responsible for our deaths.
Yes.
That's when I got scared. And in this particular film, that was the scariest moment I think we had. And then, after that, I kind of got used to some bombs going off and I'd just roll over and go to sleep, which is
Wow.
scary because you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, that was pretty close, man. You know, um,
Wow.
but this last trip, we went to a safe. I wasn't filming it, and that's why I got angry about it because we went to a safe house about 5 kilometers from Kharkiv to deliver some ATV ambulances to some soldiers. And the whole night, it was just the house was shaking. I got no sleep, and I was just so angry for putting myself in that
Mm.
situation without a purpose. If anything, all that experience taught me was how disgusted I am with war and how just horrible it is. But because I was there without a purpose, really, I felt like it was a dumb risk to take. And I was a little angry that I had put myself in that situation. And, but when I was filming, I felt like I had a purpose. I was
Yeah.
scared, but I
Yeah.
was okay. I'm like, if I die like this, I knew the deal coming in, you
Yeah.
know?
Totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the series is amazing. What else do you have in the works after this?
It took a lot out of me. I'm really just trying to work on a potential, I'm just calling it democracydefend.com right now. It's a kind of a startup kind of working on debunking Russian disinformation, seeing if maybe video journalism can play a role in that. I mean, we know that journalists in Russia get killed. We know that
Absolutely.
journalists in Mexico get killed. They get killed all over the world just for being
Mhm.
journalists. And
Mhm.
so, as a travel journalist, I never really got exposed to that danger. I mean, I was in Cuba undercover and I felt a little fear, but going to Ukraine and just seeing it, I don't feel like I can do just like a travel show anymore. Like, whoa, I'm having a good time drinking wine.
No, no.
I hope I can. I hope the world changes where
Oh,
I
I
can.
hope so too.
I hope
but-
so too.
But
Yeah.
right now, I can't do it. What I would love to do is try to open the eyes of so many people who have been brainwashed by this Russian disinformation, which has been amplified by places like right-wing media.
Yes.
Mostly,
Yes.
they play both sides, but it's right-wing media. It's the Breitbarts. Fox News started it with the election of Trump in 2016. It just went to another level. I have never seen so much disinformation in my life that I have right now. And it's vile, it's disgusting. And, Americans can have different opinions and disagree. But to be at each other's throats like this, all you're doing is empowering Vladimir Putin and Russia. I have a Facebook page for Democracy Defend. I just took out an ad on Facebook saying, check out our website.
Hmm.
I would say 95% of the comments are from what I would call MAGA Trumpers.
Oh, no.
And of those, and they were vile, they were disgusting. They don't know me. I'm a tax-paying, hardworking guy who gives back to his community. But yeah, I'm the bad guy here. And I don't apologize for taking up for vulnerable people, and I never will.
No.
And I'm just going to point blank say that out in the open and dare someone to call me on that. But I realize when I'm looking at it, I'm either looking at Russian disinformation, bots and trolls, or the downstream result of that. And so what we have to do is we have to stop it at its source. And
Yes.
the good news is you can pre-bunk these things. You can inoculate yourself to it. I've come a long way. I feel like I can spot a troll a mile away. And if you have time for one quick story, I was in Washington, D.C. at the Ukraine Action Summit when the aid was delayed because Donald Trump had told his people, don't approve aid for Ukraine. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, played along for 6 months while we were there advocating and shaming them. And then finally he's like, oh, I just read the CIA report. I think we should oh, you just now read the CIA report? I find that hard to believe.
Oh, man.
And some friends of mine who are on my side in terms of Ukraine are like, no, they were defending Mike Johnson, including some Ukrainians. So we call that Stockholm syndrome. We're all ecstatic because we knew that aid was going to pass. We had succeeded.
So, Rob, so you said earlier that you didn't have any immediate plans to go back to Ukraine. Is that right?
I'll be back there next year for sure. I'll go back. I just don't like the winter. I'll be back in the summer.
And now, these 4 episodes, you had mentioned that you have a documentary in the works. Are you going to sort of combine these episodes and make one documentary? What's your...
So happy you asked that. So basically, I just combined the what was made for TV into a documentary, and would like to invite you guys out. It's going to premiere. I don't know when this is coming out. November 13th in New York, and then we're just going to do screenings all around the U.S. But that's in New York City, and then we'll throw it online. But basically, if people want to meet and talk, and I'm going to try to get some people who've also been to Ukraine and do some Q&As. I mean, I think these grassroots things, my mom's church in Tennessee, where I'm originally from, has asked me to come in, and it's, a tiny church, but it's super important because I was so dismayed when some of those guys were repeating essentially Russian disinformation to me when they found out I went to Ukraine. And I'm like, I can't wait to get down there and just clear the air and let them know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. They're really confused.
Wonderful.
And they're good people.
Spread the good word. And now, where can people view these 4 episodes?
Yeah. So go to rawtravelukraine.com, and that's rawtravelukraine.com. And just on the front page, you'll see, our YouTube links to those, and they can see the 4 episodes there.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit our website at nowletstalkthepodcast.com and send us your comments and questions. We'll see you next time.